introducing Mr. John Summers. He is a really inspiring person, and he has led many initiatives in our community and in our region. He's been fighting for us for like a long time. And so, two initiatives I'm going to talk about. He's the president of the board of directors for, Public Citizens for Children and Youth. And basically, they've been working for 40 years, fighting for children in our region, and they fight for children's health care, social care, family issues, education, and they've been testifying and speaking out for children in this region for a long time, making sure that any problems are worked out or advocating for any issues that stand out and just fighting to make sure children in this region are happy and healthy, whether it's in school or in home. And he's also a part of the Innocence Project, which has been working for a long time to exonerate people who have been falsely convicted and anything relating to that. And that's just a really inspiring thing on its own. And in 2018, he was honored with the Volunteer Award. Him and two other attorneys, I believe, worked to exonerate a man, a Mr. Marshall, and he was falsely convicted and he served 33 years, and they helped exonerate him after 33 years of imprisonment. So that's just really inspiring, and he's like a star volunteer in that organization. So he's just really active in our community, and I'm happy that we're going to hear from him. And that's just all I have to say about him. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Samaya. Welcome, everybody. Um, those introductory remarks were very, very generous. Uh, I am a lawyer. I'm from Philadelphia, have lived and worked here most of my life, was away during college, and then returned in law school. Um, and my day job is that I work at a law firm in the city of Philadelphia called Hangley Aronchick, Siegel, Pudlin, and Schiller. And I have had a lot of opportunities. I'm fortunate to have been afforded those opportunities to help work in the community in a variety of different ways. Before I begin talking with you about the state judicial system, I want to tell each of you, and I must say I'm accustomed to doing a lot of public speaking, but most of the public speaking allows me to see the people to whom I'm speaking and with whom I will then have a conversation over the course of an hour. It's now a familiar practice to have these Zoom sessions, but one of the big problems is that I don't get a chance to see all of you. And so let me start by apologizing that in speaking with you, I don't get a chance to see your smiling faces and maybe your quizzical faces, or your challenging faces. So hopefully, through the chat function and through our able moderators, if you have questions, want follow up on specific things, I'm happy to do that. But let me kind of just start with one basic observation, which is if you were to think as young people like you and to think about what is the most important work I could be doing, what you are doing is that. The idea that you are focusing your attention and spending your time now on young voter registration is enormously important. Uh, it is the case that our republic, that is our national government, our state government, and our local government relies on active participation in the voting process and in the political process. And your work is enormously important in allowing our system to work. And frankly, it's important in making our system work even better. So I want to start by thanking you all and encouraging you. And all I can say is each of you go recruit 5 more people to help out in the worthy cause and to spread the word. I'm going to talk briefly this afternoon about the state judicial system. And I want to focus on a couple of different aspects of it in this short period of time. I want to start by giving you just a kind of an overview of it because I suspect many of you don't really know much about the state judicial system. You've heard a little bit about it, and everybody knows that the expression that if you get into a disagreement with someone, you say, well, I'm going to make a federal case out of it. Um, that there is a role of federal courts, but the role of the state courts is probably less well understood. And I want to spend some time briefly about that because a takeaway for you, I believe, should be that the state system is way more developed and pervasive and has a greater impact on most things in your life and those of your family and your friends than you would think. I then want to talk briefly about the way judges are appointed. It's not lost on me that you're a voting rights kind of organization, and there's a difference. In the state system, all our judges are elected, just like or similarly to other officials, where in the federal system, our judges are appointed. And then I want to end by just talking briefly about gerrymandering and the way the state court system and the federal court system has worked with that. So let's all step back and think about the Pennsylvania government. There is, like a federal government, an executive agency, a legislative body, and then there is a court system. The court system is what I'll focus on today. The sources of law that the state courts and state court judges interpret start at the highest level with the state constitution, which I'll talk about at the end. Then there are General Assembly, legislature statutes that apply across the whole state. Then there are local ordinances. Local ordinances like Philadelphia City Council rights. All the various counties are involved in writing their own local ordinances. And then finally, there's a whole body of law that's called the common law, which is not statutory and is not written, but is interpreted over time. And I'll talk briefly about that. What is the job of the state courts? Broadly speaking, it's to try and interpret the law. State court judges, like other judges, are mindful of the fact that they are not legislatures. They're sole people who have enormous power. And with that comes, frankly, a fair amount of deference to determinations and legislation. And there's a certain modesty that across a lot of different kinds of work that state courts judges do. Step back for a moment and ask yourself the question, well, how much are the state courts involved in our life? For context, there are 12.8 million people in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is the largest county with 1.5 million. Pittsburgh is second at about 300,000. So to do all this work for the judges, there are close to 460 trial court judges. They're the ones, along with also other judges that are called magisterial district judges and municipal judges. They're the ones that sort of handle the misdemeanors and the lowest level kinds of things. There are another about 500 of them. And then we have about 25 appellate judges. And then we have a 7-member Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So how involved do you think these judges are? How many cases do you think there are that are filed in a given year in criminal court throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? I want you to pause. I'd like, in a real world, I'd have you write down that number, and then we'd pause. Then I'd ask people for volunteers for what the number is, but we can't do that. So I'll tell you that number is, in the criminal system, about 165,000 cases. 165,000, that's in a given year. There are about 150,000 civil cases, and I'll go over that. And then there are a lot of other cases involving divorce law and custody. That's probably another $70,000. Let me start by talking about the criminal justice system and the criminal justice courts. Do you know that the state system is really where the action is when it comes to criminal justice issues? The criminal justice system in Pennsylvania has, with all those cases, has approximately, it goes through about 170 cases. Um, and you all probably watch Law and Order and you watch other things. One of the things that is missed is that of the, say, 170,000 cases that get processed a year in the criminal justice system, about two-thirds of them are resolved by guilty pleas. Do you know how many trials there are for all those people who are charged? Only 2% of people get actually jury charges. Excuse me, jury trials. Now, I think the criminal cases are a variety of different kinds. And you could ask yourself the question, well, a lot of them are, serious gun crimes, homicides, violent kinds of crimes, drug crimes that are somewhat serious. And if you ask yourself the question, how many people are incarcerated in Pennsylvania by Pennsylvania judges? The number is it's nearly 100,000. There are about 95, 96,000 people that are locked up in Pennsylvania prisons, and that's compared to about 7,500 in federal prisons. You might ask the question, where does Pennsylvania rank in its per capita incarceration? And you might be surprised to learn that we're near the top in the country at about 725 per 100,000. And that not only puts us at the top in Pennsylvania, but if you look across the globe, the United Kingdom and France have a fraction of that, about a seventh. Denmark, even less. I'm just picking those as examples. Now, there are about 460 judges that are the trial court judges that do the lion's share of that work across the Commonwealth. They're just under 100. They're 93 in Pennsylvania that do that work. Not all the work that the Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania court system do is criminal. There's also civil work. What is civil cases? It's everything from automobile accidents to a tree falls on someone's property, to medical malpractice, to um, claims that there's products liability problems, defaults, breaches of contract, all manner of different kinds of matters. And yet again, it's probably not so well understood that less than 1% of all those cases actually go to a jury trial, and about 1% are actually tried non-jury. That a lot of these cases are resolved by judges along the way or by the parties to settle them. So that, broadly speaking, is what the criminal and the civil justice system in the state does. I told you the second thing I was going to talk to you about is how judges are selected. Now, in the federal system, the way it works is it's called merit selection. And what that means is that the United States senators impanel folks who are thought to be are very knowledgeable in the law. Some are lawyers, some are not. And they screen lots of applicants and they prepare a large panel that then goes to the United States senators for the senators to make recommendation to the White House and to the Justice Department. You'll notice that absent in all that is any election. The senators are elected, but there's no election for the judges. Pennsylvania has a very different system. In Pennsylvania, judges are elected to terms. And they're elected in the various years in which there are elections. Sometimes it's on year, sometimes it's off year because there's a filling of vacancies. And that's true in the trial court, in the intermediate appellate court, and the Supreme Court as well. If someone has served as a judge and has been elected, they then can run again for what's called retention. It's not a fresh election, but it's a kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the person. And in general, if you've made it and been elected the first time, you are retained. So you may ask yourself, well, which system is a better system? And this is another thing where I would open the floor up to get your views and to see whether I could learn from you what the various arguments would be in favor of merit selection or in favor election. Uh, Perhaps it might be useful I could just identify a couple of different things. Those that favor merit selection would say we have a panel of experts who know how to identify quality, thoughtful, educated people in the law who would have the right professional background and temperament to be a judge and the right integrity. That the election process could potentially be problematic. You're asking people to serve as a candidate and raise money. And if you're having them raise money, they may feel implicitly or hopefully not explicitly indebted to serve the constituencies that got them elected. And we've had through the history of the electing judges, we've had issues that arose many years ago. There was a union that was paying money to judges in cash envelopes, actually. And that was a problem. And there's a lot of focus and policing that goes on of the way in which the election process happens with judges. And if you want to hear more about it, feel free to ask me some questions about that because there are a set of rules and regulations that are special to the running for judges. It's also thought that the election process allows a lot of randomness. There's a conventional wisdom in Philadelphia that if you run to be a common pleas court judge, you may appear on a ballot, a primary ballot, since it's heavily Democrat. And if you win the Democratic nomination, that gives you a big leg up in the general election. That if you appear below, say, number 10 on the list of candidates, people won't get and read your name. It's not done alphabetically. It's done by lot and randomness and draw. And if you're in the bottom quarter, frequently the advice from the pundit says just withdraw your name because no one in the bottom quarter has a chance of winning. So imagine that as a system for picking people. It's probably the case that we don't have that in our elections of other officials. Why? Because we don't have as many candidates for any one office. Those that are in favor of elective systems say, well, look, it's responsive to the will. We want to have people who look like and represent various constituencies, whether it's age or gender or race or profession or some other background. Having judges that look like Pennsylvania or look like Philadelphia is important, and an election process better guarantees that than a merit selection process, some people think. There's also a thought that it's a less elitist process, that who's going to be the judge isn't determined by some experts, but let people decide because the judges are going to judge those people. And then finally, there's some thought that the merit selection could be just friends of senators or politicians, and that can allow a certain kind of what people call cronyism that should be discouraged. Now, I'm advancing all these as views that one or more people actually advocate and believe in. And it's a longer conversation to tease out what, in fact, are arguments that may be more meritorious now or less meritorious now than at other times. I know one of the things that people are interested in is thinking about, well, if I'm a voter, how do I learn about these judges if I've got to elect them? That's a really good question because it's actually pretty hard. In Philadelphia, the Bar Association, which is an organization of lawyers, ranks judges. And you can learn something about their integrity, about their backgrounds by reading the reviews that the Philadelphia Bar Foundation puts out. I believe also the League of Women Voters puts out information about the judges. The other thing I would suggest people do is ask friends you trust who are lawyers. I get lots of requests every time there's an election when people are asking me about what they think, what do I think, or what do I know others in my firm thinks or friends think about judges. Let me let me just touch on a final topic, and then I'm happy to talk with you about what's on your mind. And that is what's I want to talk about sort of the harmony of the state judicial system and the great work that you do, which is about voting. I wish I could see your faces because I'd ask you to raise your hand. How many of you know what gerrymandering is? And I'm going to figure the answer's, gee, I don't know, 60%. But then I'm going to ask you a little tougher question, which is, how did it get that weird name? So gerrymandering is a practice in which there are local governments that manipulate geographic boundaries for voting in a way that advances somebody's interests, whether it's a political party in power, whether it's um, got a racial animus. I haven't read much about gerrymandering discriminating on the basis of age, but I suppose that's possible as well. And in the lingo of gerrymandering, there's what's called cracking voting and packing voting. What do I mean by that? If you imagine Philadelphia and you imagine an array, or let's take the, actually, let me not take Philadelphia, but let's take Pennsylvania as a whole. And you imagine the whole state, and you are the state legislature, and you are devising the boundaries for House seats. Pennsylvania gets allocated a certain number of seats every 10 years based on census and its relative population to others. The question is, what are the boundaries for each of these House seats? You could imagine if you are the party in power and what you want to do is maximize your power, and let's just make this neutral and we'll call it party A and party B. If you want to maximize A winning, what you would do is draw boundaries in which you break up some of the B people so that they don't have any majority in any one place. And you throw a lot of the B people where you, if they're near each other, you might throw them all in one district. So you pack them. Essentially, what you do is crack, that is divide, or pack, depending upon what your goal is. Where big picture, what you want to do is create a map in which if there are 10 districts and it's 60% A and 40% B, you want to, if you're the party in power, create 10 districts so you win 8 or 9 of them and only lose 1 or 2. That's what gerrymandering is. And it was named after a governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry, who in 1812 was clever or devious, depending upon your persuasion, to have drawn these maps. Now, is partisan gerrymandering legal? Well, there are federal courts that have reviewed this question, and there are state courts. And in fact, the United States Supreme Court has, and the state Supreme Court has. And interestingly, the federal court in a prominent case decided that that question, but it was a vote of 5-4, decided that that question was inherently political. And that while it seemed undemocratic to divide and interfered with people's First Amendment rights to vote, Fundamentally, the conclusion of the United States Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts writing the opinion, concluded that it's a political question and, to use a fancy lawyer term, not justiciable, and dodged it and said, we can't decide. We're not going to decide that. Justice Kagan wrote for the dissenting justices that she was, quote, deeply disappointed that in something so important as this issue, that was something that was so undemocratic, she wrote that it's unfortunate that the United States Supreme Court dodged it. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and I see I have about 2 minutes left, and then I'm going to finish, and then I'll move on to questions. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court case in a case called League of Women Voters versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in January of 2018 said, well, the Pennsylvania has its own constitution. And in fact, Pennsylvania's constitution predated the United States Constitution. I'll bet many of you didn't know that. The Constitution of Pennsylvania was adopted prior in 1776, at the same time the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't until 1789 for the United States Supreme Court. And the Pennsylvania Constitution, has a provision that says elections shall be free and equal, and no power, civil or military, shall at any time interfere to prevent the free exercise of the right of suffrage. And that Article 1, Section 5 guarantee was interpreted by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to prohibit gerrymandering. And I'm emphasizing that both because of your interest in election issues, but also to just highlight for you that we can turn to our Pennsylvania courts for relief for things that we might not be able to turn to our federal courts from. And that is part of our overall fabric of the way we operate in a federal system with states and the United States government. I'm going to pause there and turn to my able moderators to see whether feels like an appropriate place to take a pause and to take questions. And I am at your pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Summers. We do have some questions, if that's okay. Maybe we can start asking you some questions. Okay.
Fire away.
So we'll start off with Shayla's question, one of our interns. Do you think legislators give judges more power or regulate their power?
I think legislators write laws fundamentally that they expect the judges to interpret. And the more the legislators are specific and also empower agencies to go write regulations, they effectively and appropriately limit the scope of what the judges can do. And so I think there may be areas, if you think about it, there are areas where if you're a legislator, you want to be really specific. And then there are other areas where you'd say, I can't be specific. I want to be more general and broad and let time evolve and let a whole series of decisions unfold, because it's hard to write all the law with great specificity right up front.
Thank you for that. Another question is, what percentage of the population is aware of how gerrymandering affects them and is aware of it?
Wow, that's a really good question. And I suspect very few people know about it. I don't have any empirical basis for that proposition other than hunch and surmise, which are unreliable guides. I would advise you, if you're going to have 5 takeaways from this summer, everybody, one of your takeaways should be, whenever you have a view on something, ask yourself the question, do I have data to support it? And if you don't have data to support it, then be a little humble in the strength with which you have that. That's the first thing you should do. And what's the second thing you should do? Go find the data. You all have opportunities that folks like me and Laureen, Peter Kahn never had, which is you have like the internet to go mine, to go try and solve an infinite number of problems. And when you have good questions and you don't even see it answered out on the internet, then you all are students. Those are things that should maybe drive you and inspire you for term papers, for senior theses, and then maybe things you should pursue and understand in graduate school. So, Samira, I would say I did a good lawyer dodge of the answer to your question. I don't have a clue what percentage actually do, but I'll bet you it's strikingly few. Other questions?
Thank you. We have another question. What do you believe is the role of the judiciary? Have there been any cases where you really liked the outcome but still thought it was a case of judicial overreach?
Wow, that is a really good question. That is, our Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court was confirmed after testifying before Congress. And he said at that time, what's the role of judges? And he said the role of a judge is to be an umpire, to call balls and strikes, not to go write the law. I think actually, there is the role of what a Supreme Court judge does, and then there's a role of sort of what every other judge does. Okay. There are trial court judges whose job it is to apply the law. The job is to take the pronouncements from the appellate courts that help explain and elucidate, create tests for what the law should be. And their job is to apply it. Now, they have to, if you're a trial court judge, find facts. Okay. Think about kind of what I'll call regular old person law. Okay. Suppose you have a case in which there is a question. Someone died from cancer, and the question is, were they misdiagnosed early on, and had an oncologist done a better job along the way? And was that physician negligent, commit medical malpractice, and did that malpractice cause the person's injury, namely the death? What's the role of the judge? The role of the judge is to do a whole set of review of legal issues, and that's a complicated process that I'd get into another time. But if there was a trial, to review and help guide the jury with instructions applying the law. So, what actually did the defendant oncologist do and not do? How did that person's conduct conform to what is the norm for oncologists in the area? Did the person fall short? There might be expert testimony on that. There might then be the question, well, even if it was known, even if the person had diagnosed the cancer earlier, would that have made a difference? Is it a kind of cancer that 98% of people die of anyway within 2 or 3 years? Those are the tasks that a judge has both preliminarily and later in going ahead. I think I think actually it is a sign of a good judge to rule in a way that it upholds the law, that might also make them just kind of uncomfortable because they don't feel like it's right. But sometimes your role in a democracy as a judge is not the same as your role as a legislator. You are not elected to be part of the democratic process and to be one of, 50 or 100 United States senators or House of Representatives and the like. Your job is more narrowly circumscribed, and your oath in upholding the Constitution is to do that. Now, do I think it's really important that judges have empathy, that judges look at the consequences of what their rulings are? Sure. But I think the job of a judge is fundamentally to apply the law.
Thank you. Going back to gerrymandering a bit, Priya has a question, which is, would you classify the Electoral College as a kind of gerrymandering because it divides the popular vote?
Um, I would say not really, but sort of. And here's what I mean. Um, Gerrymandering is a partisan practice, um, but also it could be for other reasons. So it's not just it's manipulating the voting boundaries to maximize the likelihood of a certain characteristic of a candidate to be successful. And and the Electoral College isn't that. The Electoral College isn't involved manipulating maps and changing maps every 10 years. I think the um, the analogy or the closest they come together is the following. Um, there's a concept of diluting someone's vote. If you, in the case of gerrymandering, making it easier for some people to win rather than others. It's not really one person, one vote. And where those issues are taken on, there's efforts to kind of bring that more into a reality. The Electoral College is an explicit decision that we're going to weight the votes of folks in Rhode Island and Delaware and Wyoming more than New York and California and Massachusetts and others, because it's weighted by House of Representatives, and there's an equivalency, and there's a lack of proportionality. And there was a deliberate decision that is embedded in our Constitution. And there's a fundamental question that when we organize ourselves as a government, constitutional provisions that guide what it is we're going to do, we have also a constitution that allows for the amendment. And that if people no longer want to have the weighting that comes with an electoral college, there's a process to change that. And that's called constitutional amendments. And we've had a series of constitutional amendments over the length of the Republic on a lot of different issues. We haven't probably had as many more recently that have been successfully enacted, but there's a basis for going ahead and doing it.
Thank you so much. Another question from one of our interns. Do you have any insights into different types of law and the opportunities available to work on different social justice issues, especially outside of a criminal law / trial context? So she also said, a lot of lawyers who are passionate about social justice become public defenders, for example. But how can we work towards social justice in other practice areas?
All right. I think of all the questions, the pressure is the most on with that question, because a successful answer is one that's going to be inspiring to all of you who are listening to this to go in your lifetimes to try and tackle the problems that you think are most important facing our country and perhaps our world. So there is a wide spectrum of what public interest law and public interest lawyers can do. And uh, that is a whole topic for an hour. But let me, off the top of my head, talk to you about a couple of different areas. If you think about the problems that face America, there is a public interest law perspective and opportunity in every single one of those. Okay? There is a one-to-one correlation. Education. There are lawyers that work on the needs of special needs children and how education law should work to assure students with special needs better education. There is school funding issues, and there are lawyers that are focused on looking at the provisions of state and federal law to try and assure more equitable funding in education. In healthcare, there is just, there's an infinite amount of work that's being done in the health area, from all the kinds of work that's done in Social Security and disability. Um, we all know about Obamacare and the work, reproductive rights issues, and health issues that face different populations, um, lead poisoning laws. Public interest lawyers get involved in all those things. So I just tackled two of the things. Okay. There's a whole set of poverty law issues and social justice issues. There's a whole set of law that focus on things that you might not quite think of. Pension law. Okay. Securities law. All those things, people's investments, it isn't, as you get older, you'd sort of see that those have strong social justice dimensions potentially as well. Food issues and hunger issues. And I haven't touched environmental. I mean, and that's before I get to civil rights. Okay. So it is a enormous wealth of opportunities. And you will find, if you spend a little time looking at just the Philadelphia experiment, you'd see we have an extraordinary education law center. We have a disability rights center. We have a public interest law center. We have, and again, I'm putting aside criminal justice. Okay, I hope that's inspired everybody of you out there to think about these issues. Elder law. I mean, I could just keep going on and on.
Thank you for that. So kind of related to like working on causes that you're passionate about, another question from one of our interns is, how do you take care of yourself, deal with burnout, and achieve a work-life balance while working on causes that you are passionate about?
Wow. I'm just a lawyer. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, though I'm married to one. Look, couple piece of advice. Do what you enjoy doing, not what you're told to do. Do what over time you learn you're good at. Do something in a context where you're enjoying it. Some people are academics in nature, and they love just either being buried in a set of stacks, writing about 18th century or 19th century US poetry. Some people like being in a bench lab. Some people like the give and take of an office where you're batting a lot of ideas about to try and take on causes. And I think you have to know something about yourself. And, if you're 16, it's pretty early to know yourself that well. If you're 18, you're still learning. If you're 20 or 22, you're probably still learning. By the time you're 30, you can probably begin to have a better sense of who you are and allow yourself the freedom in your later teens and your 20s to grow and experiment and try different things. Because through doing that, you will figure out what fits and what doesn't fit so well. And it'll be a mutual sorting out. You'll feel what's comfortable. And the reality is, most people, when they deal with employers, they get more or less positive feedback from different things. And they will develop. Um, I'm going to keep giving you these little piece of advice on this. It's in part touches on what you're saying. Um, Another piece of advice is never avoid that which is hard. Bear down on that which is difficult. If you're a better orator than you are a writer, spend some more time on your writing. If you're shy and retiring and it's difficult for you to get up in front of a group, then figure out a way to get up in front of 20 groups, because you're not a formed person who can't change. Next, don't take yourself too seriously. Like, have some fun. And whether it's going to the movies with friends, you can't do that during a pandemic. Whether it's like thinking about what's your favorite music, whether it's picking up an instrument. Your leader, Laureen, and I were talking about before we tuned in, at her having had an interest in the trumpet and having been a violinist and a cellist. And I talked about how I played the trombone as a kid for 7 or 8 years. Why did I play the trombone? Because it was too many people were playing the trumpet, to be honest, and it was a really loud instrument. And I was like a 9-year-old, and I thought, gee, this sounded like fun. I mean, it was that stupid, but I enjoyed it and I loved it and learned to do it. And about 5 years ago, I thought I should go. I've always loved the cello. Why don't I go learn? And it's a good thing to learn how to do new things when you're not just in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s or later 50s. So how do you not do the burnout? I'd say fundamentally, um, uh, there are a lot of studies on what makes people happy and people's senses of fulfillment. If you distill it all down, it's having sustaining and nurturing relationships with people, whether it's friends and family, and it's having professional interests that you find genuinely stimulating and for which you feel you have some kinds of discretion and judgment, and you are not in a narrow thing merely implementing. Um, those more than material things are of lasting virtue. People often have practical issues. They've got student loans, they've got other things. Those are real. Being a self-sustaining, self-supporting person is tremendously important. Exactly what age, you all can navigate that for yourselves. All the studies show that having fancier cars don't make a difference, and the like. You may all believe that and be rolling your eyes that why would anyone think that? But you all probably have classmates who are pursuing certain kinds of things who are thinking that. So that is a really long answer. Samir, does that approach an answer?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I'm not just speaking for myself, but that was very insightful and motivating for me.
Okay.
Um,
Let's be really clear. So you could say, will this have been a successful hour for you all? Okay. It will be unsuccessful if you're all glazed over and bored. Hopefully that isn't the case. It will be unsuccessful if there aren't 3 takeaways that you have that you remember 3 days from now. Okay. I want you to think about what those 3 things are, and varying of you may have that. Okay. But my real wish is for a really long shadow, which is that something I've said will have inspired you to say, that's really touches something in what I want to do and who I want to be. And I'm going to work on that over the next fall semester or next year or maybe longer. because you all have a tremendous amount to offer, and you have self-selected yourself to do among the most important things that our country needs right now. Okay, that's a really big deal. Okay, you could be on a frontline healthcare worker. That's an extraordinary task, and we should enormously respect that. You could be, I mean, I could have a long list of very important things, but what you are doing and your focus shows already a strength of character and a sense of what's important in life that is I'm thinking of I'm watching a rocket lift off, and there's sort of the first stage as it goes higher. You're in that first stage. It's up to you to keep going up and doing things. But but so real success, or let me go the other way, real failure is if you put this aside and you think, okay, I like go on to the next thing and not think about how to be inspired.
Thank you so much. And I definitely think that um, your shadow is going to affect us at least a lot this summer. There's so many takeaways from what you talked about for our interns in our program this summer. We have a couple more questions. So this is a question from Shamar. As someone who is an aspiring lawyer, what kind of advice can you give others who would like to practice law as well?
Um, don't study pre-law. Don't be a paralegal. Do what you want to do. There's a guy I knew who I spent a lot of time with as he was applying to law school, and what he fundamentally wanted me to do was approve of letting him go be a ski instructor between um, college and law school, which I did because I knew he was already like a really serious guy. So seriously, if you're going to be a really good lawyer, be a really good person. Read a lot, be connected to other people, think about the problems that face the world. Um, I found it's a little geeky, but reading some judicial biographies, it's kind of interesting to read about what judges are like, good judges, and that can be sort of inspiring. And you see the arc of people's whole careers. Um, there's a movie called Just Mercy. Go see Just Mercy. Um, there's a lot you can do. Don't take yourself too seriously. And when you go to law school, don't be like the geeky person that's got a little briefcase where you look like you're a 40-year-old. Be your age, and you'll make mistakes, and you're gonna. Uh, um, it's okay to be opinionated, but remember what I said earlier, which is always think about whether there are actually good reasons and data to support what you have to say, and always test yourself. Never be self-satisfied. When you are your most certain and most strident, you may well be most in error, and always allow that possibility and have fun.
Thank you so much for that. We have two more questions. I think we're at our time, but would it be okay to like, keep you for maybe like 5 to 10 more minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is kind of like going back into the deep end with the legal system related questions. So one of our interns asked, what is the relationship like between judges and attorneys?
Um, uh, Judges say, one, gee, when I got on the bench, I all of a sudden became much more funny because everybody always laughs at my jokes. Uh, Judges also say when they go to parties, they're never left alone. It varies. Um, it really varies, and it's hard to generalize. It's very important that judges and lawyers continue to mix. I'm very active in an organization called the Inn of Court at the University of Pennsylvania, which has judges, senior lawyers, less senior lawyers, all the way to law students. And it's important that everybody understand that all judges are people. And frankly, judges are all former lawyers. So they were lawyers. And it's important that that relationship be constantly refreshed, and that lawyers have a lot to learn from judges, and judges, frankly, have a lot to learn from lawyers.
Thank you so much. And we have one more question. This kind of is talking about the diversity and demographics in judges. So the question is, how many Black and brown judges are there in Pennsylvania?
So I tried to get an answer to that question in advance, wondering whether I would be asked that question. And I don't have an answer. One of the things I read reported that about 30% of active judges are women, which is not an answer to that question. Um, it's Black and brown judges. I confess that I don't know the answer, and I would like to be more fresh about it. There was a report that was issued last Friday on the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, which I've not yet read, which was an effort to understand a set of workplace and other diversity issues in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. And I'm looking forward to reading that and learning more about it to better understand things.
Thank you so much. We have gone through all of our questions in our doc. Oh, we actually have we have a quick follow-up to when you were talking about the lawyer advice. One of our interns asked, why do you say to not be a paralegal?
Oh, it's because good question. Because most people uh, um, most people find it's not that interesting to do who are who go on to law school. But I also want to be careful about that because I was being a little smug. It was a little more or flip. What I really meant was um, uh, do something that you feel is really productive, not what you should do. And you probably think it's good to be a paralegal because it'll help me get into law school or I'll have more insights into the law. The reality is, if you go to law school, you're going to learn a lot of law and you're going to work in a law firm a bunch. And so uh, I think it may be your last chance. For example, after graduating from college, went to work in Washington uh, for a government agency as a junior economist, they called it. And I did that, and then and then Ronald Reagan won, and one of his first campaign promises was to abolish the governmental entity where I worked called the Council on Wage and Price Stability. So the handwriting was on the wall, and then I went to work for a antitrust economics consulting firm for the next 6 months before going. That was like a great thing. It was great to have some range and scope. And I don't know what it is that you all want to do. I think doing something professional is a good thing to do, but do it, you know, and if you can do it tied to what your interests are. If you think you want to do health law, go be an epidemiologist, research assistant. If you if you've got an interest in patent kind of law or technical things, go work in a lab, go intern at NIH, go, I mean, there's like go focus on the substance of things. One of the things, and I'll close with this, one of the things that lawyers probably pride themselves to a fault is we can learn anything. You know, we're a vessel of learning how to think and talk like a lawyer and reason. And just give us content. We'll learn the content, process it, and then use it. Well, I think that's substantially true and correct. But I would urge even more content. And, you know, Those of you who are technically oriented, I don't know, go to Silicon Valley and code for a year or two. Those of you who've got, and I don't know what the range of all your interests are. People who are interested in international relations, uh, there's a body of work that you can do. Environmental work, learning about some science. Stretch all those muscles. Okay, you won't stretch those things um, later as hard. So, well, listen, thank you all. You guys are terrific. Um, Sonali will always know how to get in touch with me because I'm going to give her my email address and my contact information, as I will to Samira, so that if sometime in the future you want to follow up on any of this, whether you violently agree or you violently disagree with what I have to say, please, we can stay in touch. And I wish you all the best of luck. But let me just end where I started. The work you're doing is enormously important. It has always been important. And this is an important time in the Republic's history for this work to be done. So thank you for what you're doing.
Vote that. Vote it. Vote that. Vote it.